It doesn't. All right, great. All right, no public comment. We'll move to correspondence, which I believe was all related to items on the agenda, so we ended up simply populating those items.
Did
So
you put the letter from Jay in here? I don't,
it did not come in time to make packet. It was over the weekend and the
okay.
packet closed. So it'll be both in the next solar sighting
So we
packet
don't do amended
and
packets then? We don't do amended packets then? Okay,
not, I mean, in an extreme case we would, but for something like that, we're still going to have time in the process.
very good.
It'll have opportunities to go in at least 2 packets going forward.
Hey, Jan,
Yep.
we can't amend a packet given public input. So I just want to be clear on if it's not received in time, then it'll be next agenda.
Okay,
Yeah, I just know, we have, to be clear, we have in the past done a packet. It still has to be 24 hours at a minimum before the meeting. We have added some things at the tail end that came in that were pertinent, but this one I felt had other opportunities to go in, and we will be talking about this more in the future. So the next item is Planning Commission Work Plan Overview. And I just wanted to, because we've got these two big topics for tonight's discussion, and then as Jeff said, capital.
Hey, Jan,
Yeah.
Jan, point of order, the agenda says correspondence. So before you do that,
Well, as I said, we don't have any correspondence.
well, we have a bunch of stuff added to the packet as correspondence. Let's just receive it.
No, those are all you'll see under the solar sighting agenda item 7. The appendices of 5 or 6 public comment letters are all in response to number 7. So we just bundled them on the agenda.
I agree, but I would receive them as correspondence to the Planning Commission since the Planning Commission has not previously received them.
Okay, understood. If they're so, let's have a quick let's acknowledge acceptance of the correspondence that is under appendix attachment A under number 7. If there's no concerns with that, we will take that as correspondence. Okay. So on the work plan overview, I just wanted, we've now had the benefit of staff for a month or so here, and what that's done is created a 175-page packet, which is a good thing.
I think I'm the only one.
But to put it in context so that everybody kind of sees what we're working on and what we are hoping to accomplish over the next few months. It really breaks down into these 2 big projects that are, before we get to capital planning, essentially targeted zoning regulation updates. And we'll talk through those in the next agenda item, and then town plan edits relating to solar siting. Both of those are chunks of work that will go right to our core mission, which is updating and maintaining those key regulations and the town plan. And so if you look at the zoning regulations, it really is designed, and I've talked with Stephen about this, and this is what I wanted to sort of put in front of the group here so that we all can talk about it. But it's, in my mind, a kind of non-controversial block of changes that are needed to update our zoning regulations to be aligned with current state regs, to be modernized in a clean way, to take into the account the ADU recommendations from the Affordable Housing Subcommittee and the specific lot consolidation fixes. So it's really this bundle of of changes that are significant and necessary, but also should be able to be worked through without, huge policy discussions and major amounts of contention, I hope, so that we can actually, bring ourselves up to date as quickly as possible, and avoid, the DRB ruling based on kind of old regulations. So that's the zoning reg side. We'll go into detail on that in the next item. And then the town plan updates, clearly we've been talking about for quite a while, and those are, again, targeted edits to the town plan in this case. So another one of our key documents, specific to solar siting and specific to making our town plan more usable, more clear in the regulatory climate that works for these solar siting process, and again and to encourage solar where appropriate. And we'll talk about that when we get to that item. But I just wanted people to see that we really now are getting some traction and have two big editing and approval tasks ahead of us, which is why the packet is so full of meaty material. And I think it's exciting that after a lot of dancing around some of these things, we may actually be able to get some good work done and across the line. And then both of these would be separate exercises in the process: public hearing and to the select board public hearing, one for the zoning regulations and one for the town plan. So I just wanted that overview. Any comments or thoughts from anybody on the kind of the big picture of what we're trying to do over the next few months? Marcia Price has her hand up. Muted,
Still
please.
muted.
Yeah. You're muted, Marcia.
Apologies. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. As you can see, my name is Marcia Price, and I am the president of Homes for Norwich, a new nonprofit organization. We're interested in advocating and encouraging changes in zoning codes that would make housing more affordable, and also to create opportunities for missing middle housing in Norwich. In addition, we'd like to support the farmers market in their effort to find a new home that would both meet their needs and provide an asset for our community. We're happy to offer any assistance we can, and I appreciate your giving me the floor.
Okay, Stephen.
Marcia, thank you for the introduction. I would be happy to work with you, to talk with you around these issues and the town's effort. Feel free to reach out to me in my office at any point.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see who was speaking to me.
That is
Sorry, it's Stephen.
Stephen True, the plan.
I'm at the table.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hey, Jan.
Yeah.
I never heard of Homes for Norwich. I'd like to know more. Not now.
Yeah, we can
Reach out to me in person. I'd love to know more.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move to the next agenda item, which is we've split the zoning regulation proposed changes into two blocks. The first one being lot consolidation and ADU specific edits. So I think right now I'll hand it over to you, Stephen, to go through some of the things in the packet that you've created and pulled together.
Sure. I mean, I think a good place to start would be, first of all, to, lend my support to, the work plan that the Planning Commission has come up with. I think it's a good idea. And what we have here, specifically for these two items are, is actual language for adoption, to address sort of deficiency in our definition and bylaw framework for accessory dwelling units, and also to tackle this sort of, I guess, long-standing issue in terms of lot consolidation. And does everybody know what I mean by lot consolidation and are familiar with that issue?
I believe so. We've gone through it a couple of times, and I think what's
Yeah,
good is that this is now, to your point, specific language that has been reviewed and looks, I'm assuming, just to wrap it back around to what we have heard about, that this is something that the listers have looked at and believe that it solves the issue as they presented it, because they were parties to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly had many conversations with Cheryl, just sort of the issue at large. So yeah, they're in on this solution. I also, I had the benefit of reviewing other towns and speaking with other planning directors, other zoning administrators about how it's handled in the region. Generally, I find that specifically, exempting a lot merger from subdivision is, generally considered best practice. And, this language achieves that. So it sort of addresses in the subdivision regulations, the, sort of preamble, the purpose statement by specifically exempting the act of lot consolidation from subdivision review. It provides several new definitions for, I think, really fundamental pieces, a new definition of a subdivision, a new definition of a lot. In practice, having, robust sort of fundamental definitions makes, the sort of pragmatic conversations with people about what is subdivision, what requires subdivision, a lot more simple. So, I think, expanding our definition of what a subdivision is and what a lot is does good work in terms of, providing better service to the community. I'm happy to answer any questions about the specific language. Essentially the sort of overview of the process is if an applicant would like to merge his lots or pieces of land held in common ownership, contiguous pieces of land held in common ownership, they simply apply to do that. The form, which was included in the package, the notice of intent to merge lots. I see I left Hartford's label in there. I will take that out. Essentially says, to the applicant at that point that the resulting merged lots may only be subdivided in the future with approval by the Planning Commission or the DRB in this case, the sort of normal process. So they're essentially acknowledging they're giving up their right to have, those lots. And I think one of the issues that came up at our, prior meeting was, is there an opportunity to review this proposed lot merger in the context of, the original subdivision, whether a development envelope was approved? And, I think, that question requires so much specificity, so, sort of by a case-by-case basis as to, whether it's just a straight merger or not, that it's difficult to come up with a general rule that deals with that. However, this form indicates to the applicant that they'll be reviewed by planning staff. So I think at that level, there's some administrative eyes on any proposed lot merger. And I think it solves the issue or, the sort of dialogue between the lister office and the zoning office about, what constitutes a boundary adjustment.
Okay. Just a second, Jeff. I wanted to go back to the work plan and put this in context a little.
Yeah.
This topic is kind of the farthest along of the 3 or 4 in the zoning regulations update. So I think what will be useful is to get all of the changes to this level of specificity, and then we'll have a whole, here's the bundle that we're really talking about. Here's the exact language we're talking about. And actually the lot consolidation and the ADU one is quite specific now. And so if people understand what we're trying to do and don't have serious questions about the language, then I think we can kind of move on and get to the ones for, say, the housing and the ones that you made the spreadsheet on to pull the whole bundle to an equal level of finish is
Yeah,
I think
and that's
helpful.
That's a good point, because any proposed bylaw amendments prior to adoption, it needs to be distributed to Vermont state agencies and to the Regional Planning Commission in a sort of concise, summarized form. So this process of signaling out the language is important, because we're going to need to do it later.
Yeah. Jeff, well, just a second, Jeff.
Well, I think with the good work of the Affordable Housing Committee, I would say also a revised definition for accessory dwelling units is, I would say fully baked at this point.
Okay.
We reviewed it, between a few of us, and I think it sort of addresses the new statutes around accessory dwelling units, and also sort of expands to the sort of full extent that's available in the statute.
Okay.
But again, it's fairly concise. It's we're removing this separation between an attached and detached accessory dwelling unit. I think maybe a point of discussion for the larger planning commission is the waiver that we grant on sort of existing detached structures that are being converted to an accessory dwelling use, where the zoning administrator has the ability to waive our the sort of minimum floor size or minimum size, which across the state, ours is quite good at 2,000 square feet. The idea there is, if you have a pre-existing detached accessory use structure, sort of retrofitting it to an accessory dwelling unit that's substantially smaller, really is sort of non-logical. So the language I think has some guardrails in the sense that the accessory dwelling unit, even if it is larger, that the size has been waived by the zoning administrators, it still has to appear to be subordinate to the primary dwelling. My take on the fact that there is a sort of threshold in size is to sort of preempt applicants building 2 homes, 2 primary dwellings on a lot that perhaps it isn't supported.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Jeff?
Yeah, dividing these things into two items, Jan. I like what Steve has done with respect to, merging lots. And I really like the notion of how he's incorporating staff review in terms of a notice. And I was able to talk with Steve about examples, and his use of the Hartford example is a good one. So I want to support that. I'd like to talk about the ADU thing separately unless
Mhm.
there's another question about the merger question. I want to suggest we
Yeah,
divide
I
them.
think we should step through them, and the one, I think lot consolidation, is everybody comfortable with moving off of that one? I think we understand it, we have nice language to go with, so let's move specifically to the ADU question.
So then I have other questions. So I appreciate what Steve is saying with respect to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee efforts, subordinate to primary dwelling, 2,000 square feet, et cetera. But I think I completely disagree with the direction we're heading, not with Steve. So, assuming we've got a married couple that are functioning after 40 years or more, and they want to move into this 2,000 square foot dwelling, it doesn't have to be the primary structure. I don't agree with that. So when I look at secondary conditional use, I want to get rid of all that stuff. I just want to say, look, I like the idea of 2,000 square feet. I would go so far as to say, I don't care what the square footage is for an ADU. I don't care who's primary, secondary. Those are my points of contention in our current paradigm, because if you've got on-site wastewater and water and you can make it work and you're going to move with your spouse and accommodate somebody living in the primary dwelling, that's what I would like to support.
Okay.
Do we have, can I ask a question to maybe clarify that? What would be the distinction between an ADU that is similar to the primary and creating a duplex out of a large building?
Duplex is, Gianna, duplex is 2 units connected by 1 wall. An ADU is 2 separate structures.
But I mean, you can put an ADU within.
You can, but a duplex by definition is a common wall.
I think
Mhm.
maybe we should consider this as well as the fact that a duplex can provide separate ownership.
Mhm.
And an ADU, it depends on the municipality, of course, but generally the property has a single owner. And that's sort of.
Sorry. So an
Um,
ADU can have a separate, you could have an ADU on your property and have someone owns just has the lease for owns the building and you own the land? Is that what you're saying?
I thought you were
Yes.
saying the opposite, Steve.
I am saying
I
the
thought you were
opposite.
saying a duplex could have 2 totally separate owners.
Correct.
But ADU has a single owner
Okay.
for both units,
Yeah.
and one may be rented.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the definition of an accessory dwelling unit that we're proposing is a distinct habitable unit within, attached, or detached that is clearly subordinate to a primary dwelling on an owner-occupied lot.
Yeah, and that's what I want to oppose. In the context of, I agree with everything except that the owner could live in the smaller component.
Correct. Yep.
Which was captured in our earlier,
Agreed.
our earlier language, but this doesn't speak to that at all. So the owner, it doesn't, from, looking through these regulations.
I just don't want to go through the conditional use paradigm. I
Yeah,
want it to be a permitted.
that's specific to overlays.
I definitely, I noticed that one, and we were going over it here and picked that up immediately. The simple statement that said, I think it was in the Vermont document as an example of an impediment to best use of ADUs, was
Yeah.
the statement that the owner of the lot must live in the primary unit. And that seems crazy to me. That seems unnecessary.
And that's been struck
Okay.
from this version. That notion is not contained in this.
Okay.
And to your point about the conditional use aspect, that is specific to the aquifer protection overlay, the primary aquifer protection overlay district. Okay, where a lot, and these can be subsequently reviewed. but many uses in that district are conditional. So the fact that I've made this conditional was intentional to sort of follow in the spirit and purpose of that protection zone.
Stephen, great job. I'd like to go further. Thank you.
Okay, by further,
Can we, I'll get to Jeff Lubell in a minute. I'd like to stay with the commission for a minute here, but I just wanted to clarify. So Jeff, your comment and concern is not about the ownership question. It's about the relative size and sort of primary and subordinate question of an ADU?
Yeah, and to the extent I understand what Steve is saying, and I agree. To the extent it's conditional in an overlay zone, it could be conditional going forward. I get that. That's the only paradigm in which I want to go to the conditional use review with the DRB. And I think that's what's here.
I think it should be a permitted use
I
wherever
agree.
we have single family.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So,
And I-
okay, so let me just clarify.
Yeah.
So you're proposing, and Steve is agreeing that an ADU would be a permitted use in the districts we're talking about, or essentially in all districts, just to be clear?
My filter on that was in any district where a single family home was a by right or permissible use, an ADU should be a by right or permissible use.
Okay,
There are some districts which are more protective in nature where many uses are conditional, including uses around single family homes. So in those circumstances, and there's only one, an ADU is conditional as a single family home is conditional. So
that's in one of the overlays?
yeah, the primary aquifer protection, the APO
Okay,
district.
okay, understood. All right,
yeah.
so we have Vince and then Mary.
Well, I wanted to kind of circle back to the, I guess, the owner residing in a primary residence versus an ADU. I might have read it in another part, but is there a requirement that the primary owner has to live on the property at all? Or is?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
And again, this, the reason being is that it becomes subject to different regulations. If you have rental property that is not owner occupied.
Okay.
So different permitting, state, fire permits.
Okay.
So, generally the around accessory dwelling units, the idea is that it's on an owner occupied lot.
Can I say B&B? The real issue with the legislature is the B&B thing, the rentals.
Yeah,
So I agree with the notion of forcing people to live on the lot
yeah.
to avoid renting 2 units.
Yeah, if you own the lot, you own the property and you rent it out, it is not a public building. If you rent it out and you don't occupy it, it's a public building and subject to all those regulations as well.
Okay,
We should be less restrictive.
Okay, but that makes sense. And I agree with what Jeff said. It doesn't necessarily matter big or small where
Yeah.
they're living as long as they're on there.
Right. And which was a sort of thorny thing in our current definition of an accessory dwelling unit detached apartment. So, yeah.
okay. Mary?
Thanks. Thanks for all this work. I guess a couple of questions. I don't care which property, if someone wants to live in a smaller house and rent out the larger one, fine. Could imagine we could have some situations though, where somebody's living in their home, renting out a home, changes jobs, loses it and wants to rent out both of those properties just to keep hold of them as they move for a different, move to a different town to work for some period of time and wants to come back. So I assume people can do that, but I could imagine that could be a situation. I also wanted, we talked about ADUs, I don't know, a couple of months ago in the context of affordable housing. And so I wanted, one of the questions we had, is this just affordable housing or is it more housing? And so, and I mentioned that a town that my grandparents live in, or and my parents now, you know, they have ADAs, but if you build an ADA, you must use it. You must use it to rent it out 12 months of the year so that it's not used as a Airbnb or something of that ilk. And I'm just wondering if there's been any consideration as in this for that kind of a limit.
Just, I want to stick to where we are for a minute, and then because I think the Airbnb short-term rental question is one that we can take up in a minute in an isolated fashion. That one is starts to stretch the bounds of non-controversial pretty quickly. But I just want to check. Jeff Lubell, do you have a comment that's relative to what we have been talking about?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, Brian Loeb is the one on the Affordable Housing Subcommittee who's done a lot of the research for this, and I really would like to encourage us to include him in a discussion of the recommendations. And, you know, Jan, we had talked about maybe doing a joint meeting next Monday when we have an Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and that might be an opportunity to talk more about this and really hear from him who did the research. But I will, if I could say a few things really quickly, some of which are things that Brian emphasized at the last meeting and supported the policy that we had endorsed. One is that we completely agree that the owner can live in either unit. That's fine. In fact, we endorsed a policy that did not require the owner to live in the unit at all. And here was the reason. Right now, someone can, as of right, build a duplex on their property and rent them both out. There's nothing that can stop you from doing that. So why, if you can do that, would you not allow them to rent out a main unit and an accessory unit? It just doesn't make any sense. So that is the basic point. And we do think it should be something that's automatic and not something that has to go through, you know, a discretionary process to approve. And the idea of an accessory dwelling unit being subordinate to a main unit, all that means is that it's not like a duplex, right? It's not a equivalent, you know, and that's just part of the standard definition of ADUs. Like, I don't think, but it doesn't require you to have any particular size limit. So if you're uncomfortable with the size limit and you want to raise it, I think we're fine with that. I mean, you know, my perspective, for what it's worth, is that what you're doing with ADUs is you're getting more housing built, and you're helping people meet their needs and their needs for their in-laws. A lot of people do it for their parents, you know, a lot of people, you know, so you're not necessarily getting units that are truly affordable, but they might be more affordable because they're smaller. And that's okay, right? We can't do everything in one policy. And that the short-term rental issue is a really important question, but a different set of questions. It applies not just to ADUs, but to all dwellings, right? You have to make a decision about whether you're going to regulate that. And I would certainly say that you're moving away from the idea of non-controversial. So I guess I would encourage, come to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. Let's hear from Brian. Let's kind of work it out. But I think what Stephen has, I had a few minor tweaks with the language, but I think it's very close. It's a good step in the right direction of liberalizing this. It's definitely what the state is asking us to do, which is to make it as easy as possible to let people, you know, build more units.
Yeah. Well, and I just wanted to, you're next, Jeff, but I wanted to make one point that was a fact out of that Vermont housing the statement in the packet. One of the most interesting statistics to me was that in Vermont right now, 70%, just under 70% of Vermont households are either one or two people. And so if you look at what that demographic mix needs for housing, you start talking, ADUs make perfect sense when if 70% are one or two people, what size houses do you need for that demographic? So I just found that to be surprising and quite pertinent to this discussion. Jeff?
Yeah, I think, I just want to follow up on what Mary said and what Jeff said. I think I have a real concern about inventory versus affordability. And so what I heard Mary say was affordability. And I just want to make sure that we're focused on affordability. I've heard, so working in where I work, every rich person in the United States is moving to our location. We are being subjugated to every rich person in the United States, and I'm just trying to be polite. So having said that, it's easy for me to say, okay, I'm going to do, a primary structure and an ADU, and I'm going to run them both out. I'm going to make as much money as I can, which we're seeing throughout the state. And our legislature has basically said, we don't want that. And I agree with that. So sitting here, that's why I want to continue to oppose the notion that inventory is better than affordability. I want to leverage affordability. And so to the extent that you want to live on this property, bring in, someone like me who's got handicaps, or someone like my mother who's got handicaps to provide an ADU, fantastic. Do it till the cows come home. I don't care what, or, you've got, husband and wife and 5 kids, fine, bring them in. We're going to move to this other unit, that's fine, you're going to have this home. But I don't want to get into a place where we can rent these units, because I think that undermines everything we've been striving for in terms of affordability and housing policy.
Yeah. Okay. Any other, I think, as I said, I would like to take these blocks that we have and get them to a decent and consistent place. And the ADUs being sort of lot consolidation, ADU language, and then as they come up, pull aside issues that are related but may not be at the same state as the rest of the bundle. So the short-term rental topic is clearly important and clearly needs to be on the agenda, but is nowhere near the same level of finish or sort of policy decisions made as the other ones. So I just want to be careful to make sure we don't lose that, but we don't let it bog down the quote unquote easy stuff. So on the ADU specific language that we've got in the packet, are there any other comments to close on that?
But just because I don't want to gloss over it, the proposed amendments also addresses table 3.3, which is minimum off-street parking requirements, which we've reduced, and have the table initially, well, as written now, specifies all dwellings. We've amended that to say primary dwellings. So we retain parking spaces for primary dwellings. There's no notion for extra parking spaces for ADUs in this, in this proposal.
Beautiful.
All right. Any comments on that, Mary?
I guess I agree with that. I'm really glad to see that in many respects. I just do wonder, other places that have done that, does there become a challenge of parking on the streets? Or are you assuming that the people will work its way out, that they're parking, that there's not a lot of people just jammed up?
Yeah, well, if I may, Mary, since every
Yeah,
downtown house in Norwich has a garage, park in the driveway. I can't think of an exception.
And I know anecdotally, I'm not aware of other, it's very specific to a municipality. The particular parking conditions.
Okay,
Mhm.
no, as long as we don't think it's going to become that kind of a,
Yeah, it
mess.
doesn't
I mean,
seem to be our issue in Norwich is no parking.
This is
Except
a
for farmers market downtown, but well, that's a different issue.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Right. Which is a good segue to sort of additional topics for that, we can address, which, I mean, parking is called out quite a bit in both Act 47 and Act 181.
Let's get to that when we're talking about your spreadsheet
Sure.
in a minute, Stephen. But I did want to just touch on to clarify what Jeff was saying about inventory and affordability. How do we push towards affordability? If we agree that's a goal, is that a size thing? The smaller ones are going to be cheaper, and therefore, what is it that leads you to encourage affordability? Christian?
Yeah.
Just a second, Jeff. Christian had his hand up.
Yeah, so I'm all for the notion of affordability. It's a slippery slope and it's very complicated. And to date, we've talked around affordability, but no one's proposed what a definition for that might be. And if it's in new construction or housing, is that thereby limiting, like if you're going to put rent controls on, who's going to build an ADU? It gets around, like, then we're just kind of going in circles. I think the point what Jeff Lubell was trying to make, and this is bearing out nationally, is this idea of if you allow different types of inventory to be built, it does not meet the general definition of affordability, or a specific like state or federal definition, but it's a smaller house, it's a different type of house than somebody who can afford to buy 8 acres in rural Norwich and build a 4,000 square foot house. It's just, you're getting a different type of housing structure built, which comparing the two, it is more affordable than somebody building a 4,000 square foot on the outskirts of town. So like, to me, I'm all for affordability if we can get there, but in the meantime, I wouldn't say we should like slap down on inventory. Like they can go hand in hand. And in this case, we can increase inventory and we can also still talk about affordability and partnering and what that might mean in the town of Norwich.
Okay, if we can, I want to keep moving. So unless you have something new to say on this particular topic.
Yeah. And what I want to say is, I'm going to move out of my house and charge $4,000 a month for a year and cover the taxes on my new ADU where I live with my new partner. That's not affordability. And I think I think to the extent we think about inventory versus affordability, they're diametrically opposed given where we are currently.
Okay, Jeff Lubell quickly, and then we'll
Yeah.
go to the next topic.
So, first of all, we are not in compliance currently with state laws, and any kind of restriction on the rent of these units would not be in compliance with state law. State law makes it very clear that you need to allow people to do ADUs. And they want us to liberalize it and not make it harder. So I don't know how we're even thinking. I mean, the whole point of this is to try to make our policies in compliance with state law. I don't even know why we're thinking about limits. If you want to make, it would be compliant, I believe, with state law. I'm not trying to give you legal advice, but my understanding of state law is if you wanted to require that the owner live in one of the 2 units, I think that would be allowed. I'm not saying you should do that, but I think that would be allowed. What would not be allowed would be saying you can only do an ADU if you charge less than X or Y. I just don't think that would be compliant. The whole point of the state law is we want to get more housing built. If we get more housing built, the overall price will go down. That's basic housing economics. I'm not saying that just building 3 ADUs is enough. You got to build a lot of housing in a lot of places. We need a lot more housing in Norwich. We need a lot more housing in the Upper Valley. We should be doing everything we can to build more housing. We should also separately be really trying to encourage affordable housing. We've got Andrew Winter here. I mean, there's a lot of ways to develop affordable housing. Would certainly encourage us to do that.
What Jeff is saying nationwide may be true, but it's not true in this community. It is not true.
Okay, I'd like to.
Please,
quickly,
I do want to respond to that. I don't think that, I am not in agreement that we want to bring lots and lots and lots of housing up here. I think that, I think this is a good topic to discuss, but I think just at least, I'm not sure that everyone in town, people did not move up here so that we can build lots and lots and lots of housing. And, build more housing, sure. Build some get ADUs as the state requires, sure. but let's try to do it with a target of getting affordable housing or workforce housing. Let's call it workforce housing. Let's try to get it for the, as Jeff mentioned, the people who want to have their in-laws or their parents up here and need that for family. And I think that there are ways to do that by saying, you know, if you are going to do this, you're going to rent it for 12 months. You're not going to be doing, you know, there are ways to do it. But I think fundamentally, lots and lots of housing is not a goal.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with
Just
that.
to be clear, I was
sorry.
not saying in Norwich, I was saying lots of housing in Vermont.
Well,
We
and
need
you
more
said the Upper Valley, and so
We
anyway,
need more,
whatever. Yeah.
we need a lot more housing in the Upper Valley
Yeah.
to meet our needs. That's very,
Yeah.
very clear, because otherwise housing prices are going to keep going up. So if you want housing to be unaffordable, do what we're doing now and don't build a lot. So
That's
Oh,
not
we-
true.
thousands
That
of-
is not
Okay,
true.
guys,
And I
I
heard you
wanna-
say Norwich, it's not true.
All right, let's pause, hit the pause button on that one. I want to, because we absolutely need time for the solar siting conversation.
You said Nora.
And so I would like to, Stephen, to the specific question, and let's try and just give this 10 minutes, and then we'll move on and put it on the agenda for the next meeting. But the point is to be compliant with state law, which is
Yes.
one of the bare minimum criteria for this first bundle of zoning regulation changes. What do we
Right.
need to do? What we're trying to avoid is the embarrassment of our DRB, who has to look at the current regulations and act accordingly, denying something where that then gets appealed and we lose because we're not in compliance. So that's the spreadsheet you created. And if you could give us a little background on that spreadsheet, we can decide, you know, kind of next steps.
Yeah. So what I did was I sort of summarized, you know, sort of legislative changes over a period from 2009 to present day. You know, in both these spreadsheets, there's a lot of things that don't directly touch bylaws. So at this point, you know, I prepared this sort of as you know, the sort of playing field. These are the legislative topics and specific you know, requirements and rules from you know, the Home Act and Act 181. So you know, we don't really need to get into the nitty gritty here. I think my immediate next target to look at is our parking requirements. You know, Act 47 and Act 181 have, you know, give municipalities sort of broad latitude to reduce parking requirements. So I want to touch on that. So I think you know, the next piece of work that I'd like to present to you is proposed language to amend our parking requirements, which are voluminous.
So how does that relate? So what you have here then in the spreadsheet though is some pretty specific proposals. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the language that is struck out, for example, is our current language that says, no, this isn't in compliance, or here's what the new state regs say. So is what you've stated here a proposal of specific changes for us to be in compliance?
So there's two separate documents. One is sort of legislative topics and how they may touch our regulations. The other is a summary of Act 47, the Home Act, and the specific parts of Title 24 that they touch. So our bylaws derive from Title 24. So these are the areas of Title 24 that have been changed.
And would therefore require a change to our zoning regs?
Yes and no, because there are changes so Title 24 refers to you know, sort of zoning at large. So there are, you know, there's changes that only apply to regional commissions. There are changes that, talk to administrative processes such as hearings and notifications. So we will have to incorporate all of this, but specific mandated changes to our bylaws are fairly limited through Act 47 and Act 181. And they are for municipalities without utilities. They are around duplexing, accessory dwelling units, and parking.
Okay.
And there's some procedural, items that I think we need to pay attention to, for the DRB, for example. But in terms of specific this is what this document summarizes.
Okay, that by itself is useful for me, at least, to summarize what it sounds like you're saying is these state laws, for us to be in compliance, those three areas, ADUs, which we just talked about, duplexes and specific things that need to be allowed and so forth, and parking are the three areas where we absolutely need specific review and change to our zoning regs.
Yes.
Be in compliance.
Yes.
Okay.
I do think also, and we could preserve this for another round. I mean, because I think we'd like to, at some point, look at our zoning districts in total. But our shoreland protection overlay was developed prior to 2014 and the Wetland Protection Act and the Shoreland Protection Act. So I think we have built into those districts some overreach that I'd like to review according to those acts.
Yeah.
But sort of specific to direct impacts on our municipal bylaws, it is fairly constrained.
Okay. So to the degree that we're talking about specific ADU changes, we have some there are pretty clear cut things about the duplexes that you can write up language or changes to our thing. And then parking, which you said is kind of the next specific piece to look at, that covers those three areas.
Yes.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I want to say thanks to Steve for this matrix. It's great. I want to agree with Steve with what he said about shoreline and wetlands post 2014. Great points. We should get to that. I only have two questions relative to the matrix, and that is on page 1 under 4412. It's a second block down. It may be a rhetorical question, but it says, number 1, the property has sufficient wastewater capacity. Because you can't get state approval, is that why you're eliminating that? Because I think it should be left. Section 4412.
Whether that is already covered, is that redundant with the state is already going to check it, or you're saying leave it in?
In our regulation, I'd like to keep that sentence if we can, because you can't get approval if you don't have capacity. So that's the one section I would keep. I get it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I assume it's redundant because it's state.
In terms of what that specifically is saying, the statutes originally had that language in reference to a pre-existing sort of non-conforming detached structure. So it attached. So when we're considering, somebody who owns a barn and they want to, convert it to an accessory dwelling unit, do they have to build a small little apartment within that structure? Prior to that redaction, they did, because that's how it was defined in that context.
By law,
we've removed that. Well,
you can't change any use without compliance today based on water wastewater. So my question is, I don't care whether you take it out or leave it in a sense, because you can't get approval unless the state says, yep, you can do it.
Yeah, and I think,
I'd rather notify applicants. That's why I'm suggesting maybe leave that in.
I did have, and I want to just cover this and then we can pause and give Stephen his homework. Because that was one of the questions, reading that Vermont document that was very useful and looking at all this, the question of wastewater capacity as it relates to ADUs and duplexes and everything is absolutely critical. And if I am a homeowner and I want to put an ADU in, or I live downtown and I want to add occupancy units,
yeah,
you have, just for helping our applicants, we need a simple answer to that question. Here is what you need to do to confirm that you can add another bedroom or another side of a duplex or whatever to
Yeah.
your property. And I
Yeah.
think that would be a very useful little cheat sheet. To Jeff's point, it's going to tell you the state has to do this, and here's how we assess your existing system, and so on.
right. And, we do, the section 4.14 does, address that, has sufficient wastewater capacity. So, as a zoning administrator, when I have this conversation with, around permitting for these structures, the conversation's always, do you have a wastewater permit? Do you have capacity? You'll have to get an amended wastewater permit. And that's typically the solution for accessory dwelling units, is that if you have a 4-bedroom house, you administratively give up one of those bedrooms to the accessory dwelling unit.
Depends if it's attached or not attached.
There are specifics,
Yeah.
but
All I'm asking
that is
for,
the
Stephen,
criteria for permitting for an accessory dwelling unit. You have to have sufficient
Hey,
wastewater capacity.
right, I
my whole
understand.
point, Jan, is look, unless you can prove conformity today, you can't expand.
Yeah,
And so the more we say to folks who want to do this, demonstrate that you conform with current rules. That's all I'm saying.
yeah.
And I would, to the philosophy that we're talking about here, which is make ADUs have fewer hurdles,
Right.
then I think to help that happen, whatever we can do to have resources for homeowners and have, little guide sheets, wastewater permit. You say that to somebody, they're going to go, huh? But if you can help them through that, say what it means, how do you, all those things, I think would be a very useful resource.
And we do that.
So my
So-
second question was 4303 on definitions.
Yeah,
Under B, the unit does not exceed 30%. Are we restricted by law, Steve, to that? Or can we go over that?
I thought we could go over that. I thought.
what I
that
thought
was
too.
the
I
point.
mean, I don't think we can be more restrictive than that, but I believe we can be less restrictive. And
Well, I would change the wording.
municipalities are.
Yeah.
And, the state still maintains that definition. They do have a size threshold in their definition of an accessory dwelling unit.
Well, I'd rather say the unit is not less than 30%. I mean, I'd rather frame it in a way that doesn't restrict something more than 30%.
And the proposed amendment language for our bylaws does.
Okay, all right. So I really want to park this. I think it's been a
Yes.
really good conversation. What I would ask Stephen
Yeah.
is, I would like to move the other pieces of this bundle, specifically, like you said, parking, the duplex question,
Yeah.
any of these other things, so that they are at equivalent level of finish to the ADU and the lot consolidation. So we can
Yes.
start looking at that, have a sort of a summary page at the front, and then specific wording, and we can really start to hone in
Yep.
on this.
Yep. Yep.
And then separate from that, it sounds like you have, or alongside, there may be procedural things about for how the DRB works and
Yes.
so forth. But let's move it to the next step so that bundle can keep progressing.
Yes, that is, and to that point, I met with Two Rivers last week, and they've agreed to have a sort of revisionist look at our bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
With no mandate there, just a helpful eye, framing the question around compliance with state regulations. So I think for next month, I'm going to move these documents, these amendments into a working, proposed amendment document. Yeah.
All right, good. Thank you.
Keep pushing it.
Jeff Lubell, I think to ask the question I think you're going to ask to the group, which is if the Affordable Housing Subcommittee has their regular meeting on Monday, this coming Monday, do we, as the Planning Commission, want to do anything official alongside that, have it be a joint meeting and continue this conversation, or simply invite the plan? If we encourage or invite Planning Commission members to attend and we hit a quorum, then we get in trouble if it wasn't warned as a joint meeting. So what do people think about that question?
Jan, can I just add to that a little bit? So first of all, thank you for talking about these things, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss them with you. Would love to engage the Affordable Housing Subcommittee together with the Planning Commission in thinking about these. I appreciate all the interest in affordability. We're really interested in affordability. I think we want to talk about some things that will help make housing more affordable. One of the problems in particular, one of the things I'd like to talk about in particular is how can we make our development code more flexible so that when someone proposes something, that we're able to accommodate it without going through a 2-year process of revising our zoning code. I think the farmers market application is just really one of what could be many examples of how people come up, they have an idea, they want to do something. I mean, if you ask me, I think there's nothing that would advance affordable housing more than sort of moving the farmers market across the street. That would open up the possibility of affordable housing where the farmers market is now. It would open up the possibility of affordable housing in partnership with the farmers market. But our zoning code is just not very flexible, right? And so could we create, a lot of other communities have, opportunities for waivers or for special use permits or for things that allow them to address things that emerge, right, that they didn't anticipate. And we don't have that flexibility. And I think if we could be more flexible, we could accommodate those kinds of things and other kinds of proposals. I'm not saying it's limited to that one. And that's in particular what I'd love to talk with you about, is see whether that might be another kind of low-hanging fruit that we could include in a package, just some more flexibility in our zoning code that would allow us to accommodate special requests. We could put criteria. We could say, obviously it has to be supportable by the infrastructure, et cetera, appropriate to location.
All right, Jeff, I really need us to move on because we have another big topic, but I guess what I would ask the group relative to next Monday's meeting, if Planning Commission members plan to attend that meeting, please send me a note. And if we start to approach a quorum that might show up at that meeting, then I can warn it so that we have at least not breaking any rules.
Otherwise, yeah, and I want to follow up on what Jeff said.
Jeff, I have 15 people here.
I understand, but the main question is, what zoning districts do we want? So I understand we have a lot of lay board members who don't understand what zoning is. Right now, something like a farmer's market is a variance. Apply for the variance, fine. If you want to change the zoning, that's what we're talking about. Offer suggestions about how we change the zoning. Changing the zoning may or may not accommodate the affordability of housing.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna draw the line there. Thank you for bearing with me in terms of limiting a very interesting topic. I have notes of 3 or 4 things, including the make it more flexible, short-term rental, things like that, for agendas in upcoming meetings. But thank you very much, and Stephen will move forward with the specifics of that bundle. And again, let me know if you're planning to attend Monday's Affordable Housing Subcommittee meeting. So next item on the agenda is the town plans edits relating to solar siting. That is a report back from that subcommittee. So I'm going to hand it over to Mary, who's the lead of that committee, to kick off that conversation.
Thanks, Jan. And thanks to all the people who wrote in, appreciate it. So just to put some context, because there are some new faces here about this work, I just want to be really clear about the objective of the work. It is to clarify the town plan when it comes to siting of solar. And why? The reason is that the current plan is very vague about as it relates to regulatory decisions. And that has become a challenge for the town. It's become a challenge for developers, and it's been a challenge for people who are trying to understand what might happen to the land in town. We also have the Act 5100, which actually changes some of the fundamentals that are part of the town plan. The current town plan says that we can no longer have default. Most of the town except this area is preferred, can be labeled as preferred siting. We can't do that anymore. So there's some very real reasons why this needs to be changed. A number of the letters said this is all about limiting, moving away from commitments. I want to clarify, it's about taking this important town document, which is important for decision-making about how the land in this town is used, and making sure that it actually can be used in a way that is helpful, that is instructional, and that helps to guide decision-makings both of this committee and of the and of others coming into the town. So for example, when Aaron Lamperti came and put a proposal to this group, there was a lot of talk about what are the parameters around which we are making decisions? How do we evaluate this to know that this approves to the town plan? And the committee made a decision, and then I experienced this group as being surprised when Two Rivers denied it, and denied it based on what was in our town plan. We're not going to relitigate Upper Loveland right now, but suffice it to say that the report that came out from the PUC essentially said to me, and I hope to all of us, and I'm sorry Jay wasn't able to be here and his note is not, we can talk about that next time, but essentially said that the PUC noted that there were many problems with the plan, that you got incomplete information, you got incorrect information, and the PUC did not make any changes based on that. So we have an approved plan, which I'm sure many people are delighted about, not Joy Kenseth, whose property will probably get flooded and ruined, but a plan that will cut 8.5 acres, not 3 acres, that will be on a ridge site, that will be highly visible. And those are all things that are in your plan, that the plan is saying we want to protect ridge lines, we don't want things to be visible, etc. So if we want to change those, so we need to do this. We need to have a document that's clear on the regulatory language. And that's what we're trying to do. We are not trying to rewrite the town plan. I think there are many parts of the town plan that probably many of us would like to see revised, but this is to go in and make this more acceptable and usable for the regulatory reviews. I want to talk about process for a moment as well. The process has been, we've got a solar siting committee that has been working on this. It's been open meetings, and people have come and given their thoughts and shared documents. We've posted all of those. This is, I think, really the very first time we've come back with this document to the Planning Commission. There have been a number of people who have asked, why hasn't it gone to conservation, to energy, et cetera? It needs to come to the Planning Commission first. This is, to have this group provide its input, and then the solar committee will take that back. We'll take the input from this committee and this conversation back. We'll make further edits to the document. And at that point, we will want to socialize it and get input from other committees in town. So that is the process that we will follow, and then move to the select board. So let me just pause and see if there's any questions, comments?
Just, I would add, as a subcommittee member, I wanted to add kind of my view on that. And I think the process point is a very good one to make and be clear on. The Solar Siting Subcommittee is an advisory subcommittee, working group, whatever you want to call it, that has a charter from the Planning Commission to do the legwork, to do the research, to understand the state laws and other town plans and so forth, and then come back to the decision-making body, the policy body that is the Planning Commission. So there's certainly differences of opinion within the subcommittee. I brought up a couple different issues at the last meeting that said, I think this is too restrictive, or I don't like this. The point is that it is for the subcommittee to frame the issue, suggest methods and solutions, and then this group as a whole looks at it and makes policy decisions. And I think that's important. The other point that was certainly helpful to me in doing the work was to understand fundamentally, based on the way state solar siting works, solar different than Act 250 housing, different than other types of projects, the town plan is the only document that is used. Zoning regs are not consulted, subdivision regs, it's the town plan. And so the vagueness and aspirational nature of a town plan, it does not serve well in that regulatory function. And so the dance that we have to play here is the specificity of shalls and musts and real details in a planning document. And that's what we have to talk about, is to say, okay, do you say this slope value you cannot do something in, or this particular district you cannot do something in? So it'll feel more specific than is natural for a town plan, but that is part of the way the state process works. So that we know that.
Thank
Jeff?
you. Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, so like Stephen did earlier with respect to housing considerations, I want to know what the state law requires. So when I think about the way Two Rivers address Aaron Lamperti, my reaction to that was, where's Two Rivers coming from? Because from my perspective, what Two Rivers is saying doesn't comport with the law. And I'm not saying I understand the law, but let's understand the law. Because when I get down to proposed plan changes, the second bullet, I don't agree with any of those bullets. Slopes greater than 15%, historic village district, ridge line, shoreline, high priority forest blocks, et cetera. And I can pick any one and say why. Because to me, science matters, if you will. Let's just say forest blocks. So to the extent you have access to three-phase power, that pretty much limits where you're going to be in town.
Right.
So I'm not asking for comment. I'm sorry. So to the extent we can understand if we have access to three-phase power and Two Rivers hypothetically says it's a forest block, well, let's understand that, because that's horse hockey. I'm just going to say it that way. Riparian areas, what are riparian areas? So, fluvial protection, riparian areas, the only riparian considerations might relate to the Pompanousek and Connecticut River. All the rest are fraudulent from my perspective. So those are in the most developable areas in our downtown. So there's really no riparian consideration that we need to incorporate in our rules. When I look at slopes, I don't care if you build on a cliff if you're not creating erosion and sediment control. If you can, so, wetlands, if we're going to put in, these helical piers that may be an inch in diameter, there's no impact. What's the real impact? If we're worried about wildlife, given the elevation of the array above the helical pier base, demonstrate to me the science that supports any of these bullets, because I'm not seeing it.
to answer one piece of that, Jeff, that I agree with is that we need to understand what is required by the state, partly because we simply have plenty to do, and there's no point in us writing up something that has no power because the state disagrees with it and overrules us. So something like high priority forest blocks is pretty much a done deal based on state requirements. If you, not even to rivers, but to the state. So it definitely is helpful to have as short and as accurate a list as possible to say, these are the things that the state requires, both process and content. And then the Two Rivers, the Regional Commission one is a separate list with a different weighting function, clearly. Because I asked specifically the Two Rivers, I went on the Lamperti forest clearing. It was what level of forest clearing, acres per megawatt, was allowed, and the Two Rivers number was different than the states, was considerably more restrictive than the states, and I never got a decent answer as to where they got it from and why they settled.
Jan, all I'm saying is, can we
I'd
see
like
that?
the
Can we
list.
see what the
Yeah.
state wants? Can we see what Two Rivers wants? Then we can evaluate this.
But I think we want to see what we want too, Jeff. This is not an exercise in what is scientifically possible, right? I mean, if that were the case, we would be having that's not what the town plan is to do. We are trying to make, I would say, surgical edits to this document. We are not trying to rewrite the town plan. If we were trying to do that, then maybe we start all over again. But the town plan, the current town plan says that the areas that are off limits essentially to solar are the historic district, the shoreline, the ridge line, obviously you go for special permission for these, and high priority forest blocks. So if we want to start, we're not talking about doing a rewrite of the plan. I think that's what I want to focus on. We're trying to go in and saying, that has been what the town plan, as many people in their notes said, that was supported by the town. But now we need to go in and say, all right, well, if that is in fact what we want to do, how do we define it so that in regulatory language, it can be actualized, as opposed to just saying, so we need to figure out steep slopes. Is it 15%? I mean, Margaret Cheney looked at where Upper Loveland was going and said, this is a cliff. Well, it still got approved. So, what is it that we want, and how do we understand that? On that one, we got to understand the hydrology, et cetera, the water. I see your hand, Jeff. Let me just finish, please. Then I'll. Okay.
Well, that's
go ahead.
fine. No, Mary, if you.
No, go ahead, Jeff. It's just hard to talk when someone's got their hand waving.
That's-
I'm not going to repeat myself, Jan. So when I understand what the state requirements are and the Two Rivers requirements are, then I can better evaluate this. I'm going to leave the
So,
meeting.
I just have sorry.
Jeff, there's no reason to leave the meeting. I don't
No,
understand.
I'm going to leave the meeting, Jan. I've said what I need to say for this, and it's going to take the rest of the meeting. So until we understand what the facts are, I can't move forward on this.
Well, we have facts and we have town desire and we have feedback from town members to hear. So
Amen.
I would
Proceed.
prefer to sit, if we will get the state law, we've been doing this for a year and got those numbers and answers. So I'd rather talk about it.
Yeah, I guess.
All right. We still have a quorum. We will continue. Stephen, did you have something?
Yes, I can't remember now. It'll come back to me. So please continue.
I just had a quick clarification to what Mary was saying. Did you say that these bullet points are currently in the town plan and that's what needs to be potentially changed, or are these recommendation proposals
No.
changes?
Thank you. So the town plan, so the town plan is, I included the town plan that's approved as part of the documentation. And so if you look at that, you'll see that right now, the language is that, that these are, restricted use areas have been decided by the town, and they're named as the village, the shoreline, and the ridge line, and then the forest blocks. And those are the areas right now where if you want to put in a solar development of a specific size, then you do need to go and get a certificate of public use. And so that this is partly what I'm trying to convey, is that we're not going back and litigating what the science is or what the state is. We're trying to work with our current document and make it more effective for that. And so so the current plan already identifies those areas.
But I think the distinction maybe, Vince, that the reason you see it listed here under the proposed plan changes, the difference is in the current plan document, it's vague. It discourages it, it's not strong language. When you have to start looking at something with a regulatory function, some of the proposed changes simply take the same statement, development shall be discouraged on steep slopes is roughly what's in the plan now, and add a more specific number and the word shall or must instead of encouraged or discouraged. So I think that's part of the proposal, and part of what we need to discuss is in what areas, and very specifically what areas and what numbers, do you use the term must, and shall, rather than vaguer language.
Yeah,
Stephen?
so a couple of examples,
Yeah.
just if it's helpful. Right now, the policy would be guide development away from priority forest blocks and discourage fragmentation or subdivision of land within these blocks. And so guide development, that doesn't give anybody any idea of, is it permitted or is it not permitted? And as Jan said earlier, the zoning doesn't apply. This is the only guidance that you get. So how do you determine whether it's permitted or not? Development said visually prominent locations on ridgelines and hills as viewed from public points. We need to understand what public vantage points are, and so to be able to do that. Yeah, Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to acknowledge, so the kind of conflict in the statements of we started off with addressing some of the letters that were sent in that were not being prohibitive, and we're not trying to limit solar across Norwich, but then we're saying at the same time that the town plan is vague and it could be and it could not be. And so every place that we're being surgical, we're choosing to say not be. So any place that it's vague right now, we're coming down on the side of limiting solar. So where it's vague now, we're leaving absolutely no question with this rewrite that there will be no solar on vantage points. There will be no solar on forest blocks. There will be no solar. I just want to be clear that that's kind of a little against where we started, that we weren't trying to limit solar.
Mary,
That's
can
fair.
I answer
Yeah,
that, Mary?
Yeah, please.
Well, because I want to point out, well, first, sort of generally, the point was, if what we had before was as encouraging for solar as possible, but vague, which I think is an accurate statement of the current town plan. And we look at the results in terms of number of kilowatts of solar capacity put in other than rooftop. In the last 5 years, it hasn't succeeded in its goal, say, of encouraging solar adoption. What we are trying to do, what we are proposing, is really both sides of the equation. What you pointed out is true. Take some language and be specific and concrete about the is nots. But the other piece that is equally important is to say, okay, where and under what criteria and by what process do you find the specific, and now it's called prime areas rather than preferred, but prime areas for solar. And we had a very useful conversation in the last subcommittee meeting about a specific mapping exercise where it's quite simple. If you look at three-phase power and priority forest blocks, which are either state required or sort of commercial, and you can't have a big system without three-phase power. If you just take those two criteria and map the town, 3/4 of the town drops off. The sort of entire western 3/4 drops off. But we went through an exercise, and you can find 3, 4, 5 sites, including sites that are 13, 15 acres in size, that meet criteria for prime solar. So, and that's, several megawatts of solar capacity. So I personally, as a member of the subcommittee, I'm very much looking at both sides of the equation. Here's where we don't want it specifically, not appropriate for these reasons. And here's where it's encouraged and called out. And I think we can get more solar by doing that than a blanket, vague encouragement.
Right, I mean, the current plan is really encourages development anywhere in the town. And yet the plan also says we value the scenic nature of our town. We value open space, we value forest, we value ridgelines, we value these things. And so there's a balance there. But you're right, I think that we've been trying to find a way to, the original plan did not speak at all about any solar generation that was larger than 500 kilowatts. And, that could be, if that's something that the town would want, that could be, an opportunity to do that. And, and again, that we're talking about how do we thought about some areas that we would want to, I think, go talk to the people who own the property. And that's what one of the things that was discussed, just to see, we don't want to start putting arrows and saying you can develop it here, here, and here if people in fact are not eager to see their property defined in that way. So it's
Bob had his hand up.
Oh, I can't see that. Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I don't know the end of it around the greater than 500 kilowatt, where you say there's a few sites in particular, because I mean, I guess you said that there were some that were 2 to 14 acres or something like that, where, I mean, I guess 500 kilowatts is about 2 acres, 2 or 3 acres generally. And panels,
it's
something in that range.
4 to 7 acres per kilowatt per megawatt kind of number.
So, I mean, I guess, provided it's an exhaustive list of where it could be provided or could be set, we'd be eliminating something else popping up there. I mean, like when I was looking at just Google Maps there, I mean, I guess there was right near Honeyfield Farm. I don't know the particulars of that, all those panels right there that are, since we're, I mean, it kind of ticks off a lot of boxes that seem to be coming up now, people not wanting to see the stuff at all. It is a completely hidden, I don't know how many acres that is, but it looked like 300 or 400 panels at least or so. I mean, just
that's behind the town well. There is an existing array that looks like about 500 kW from the acreage of it. That doesn't fill the former gravel pit that's there. So there is other acreage there as one example. And former gravel pits are encouraged by the state as an already existing place to point solar towards. But that is one example, Bob.
I mean, that there are examples out there. I mean, if we have an exhaustive list of possible places, that's great, but I'm just a little reluctant to you know, jump. I mean, I certainly don't like seeing, you know, we're going to limit something like that just in the town. Not that, you know, because here's an example of something exactly that size that's pretty much hidden. And on top of it, if we're talking about not being restrictive, something like riparian area, I mean, that seems like is there a definition that is used by the state that we're going for? Because, I mean, there are many riparian, I mean, essentially you could consider like, you know, like a Huntley Meadow type area that, you know, 150 years ago was more flooded and whatnot. That could be a riparian area. That seems like a term that I hadn't seen in the town plan before, that we're adding additional.
No, it was in there. We didn't add it. It was in there.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think we have to be, you know, somewhat technical here and note that for all of the, you know, these hearings that the Public Utility Commission conducts, their reviews, the Agency of Natural Resources is party to that. Which means sort of questions around wetlands, riparian areas, forest blocks are, you know, they would be addressed by that agency during those proceedings. But you know, in the definition of a preferred site, which is, you know, part of the criteria of application, it can be a specific location determined by a municipal legislative body and a regional planning commission that has been identified as suitable and is consistent with applicable policies in their respective plans. So my understanding here is our intent is to have applicable policies.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And
That
I'm
are
wondering
specific enough to be useful. I
Yeah.
think that's the
And
point.
in their review, they're looking for clear written statements.
Correct.
But those clear written statements are constrained sort of to the aesthetic considerations. So I'd be, which are important, but I'd be reluctant to sort of all of these, you know, sort of areas that have been identified are large.
Which
Our
area-
shoreline,
which
the
areas?
shoreline protection area,
Yep,
the
yep.
ridgeline protection area, the historical village, I don't think is an actual zoning district. It might
Village
be,
center is, but
yeah. So you know, I wouldn't want to, you know, I wouldn't want to be involved in, you know, setting a policy that becomes sort of accidentally restrictive. So I think it's easy to do that by sort of dotting shalls and musts throughout the town plan.
So what do you see as overly restrictive?
If the goal is to be able to communicate specific locations and then have, you know, be able to point to policy, I would, you know, sort of limit looking beyond a known set of specific locations. Where do they occur? What, you know, what is the land use context where we believe there's specific location?
So Jan could speak, and I know, Christian, I see your hand. Jan can speak to that because, in fact, he has done a lot of work in looking at our town and aligning where the three-phase power is, and therefore where you could build. And so okay, so that's that. may I just please finish? So that's,
Sure.
you know, that is one way to do it, is to say, here are the areas. Now, you said to me this afternoon, well, we could just easily add three-phase power, which not easily, but we could add it, which I don't think is really reasonable and likely. But you know, we're in a situation now where we're trying to get a plan that can be actionable by this group in a way that, you know, that's not vague, that doesn't leave it to, well, what do you think? And maybe, like, is this what the town wants in the town plan? And I agree that there's, you know, so anyways, period. But Christian, you had your hand up.
I'll just say two quick things. One is I tend to not be more restrictive than needed. So we don't need an overly restrictive town plan. If you need three-phase power and there's not a ton of sites, then like why go through the process of prohibiting sites that already aren't suitable? Like they're not going to be developed. They're kind of like, we don't need to like cross those areas off and be overly restrictive. My other point is, if the goal is, I totally understand the need for clear direction from a governing sense and like in making policy recommendations. I also totally agree that from that standpoint, the number one way to do this and the easiest way to do this is to not allow solar anywhere except for these 4, 5, 8 preferred sites. I don't really think that's necessarily what the town set out to do in 2020. And that's not really my read of this plan, is that these 8 sites are okay and everything else is a no. So like, I get that that's totally easy, but I think there's got to be some happy medium. And if that means we have to hear people come up with plans and deliberate, I'd rather that than be so restricted that we say these 5, these 9, these 12 sites are okay.
I think the challenge with that, Christian, I mean, I hear you, and you know, and as Jan said, that the plan that we have had, that this 2020 plan is very open to people coming. There's very little that is providing any regulatory constraints to people, because there's you know, there's no regulatory language in it, and we see that happening. And so you know, if someone comes with a plan that says they want to put it in a place that you all think makes sense, you know, like, oh yeah, we could see putting it there, then fine. But if they come in and say they want to put it, you know, I don't know, you know, in a place where in general, there's people on the commission say, gee, we don't think that's what we want to do in town. If your plan doesn't permit you to deny that, you're going to be having to approve things that you don't want to approve. And maybe you all feel like you can put solar anywhere in this town. I certainly don't feel that way. And I think that it is the responsibility of the planning commission to try to outline, where is it that we want it? You know, and the original town plan said, you know, that you've got to get special permission in these areas. And then what does that mean? What is special permission? What are going to be the, you know, if you get special permission, what do you need to be able to say, we looked at this, we looked at this, we looked at this. But right now, we don't have any of that.
So
I think you're going to be very vulnerable to developers who are going to come in and say, this is awesome, open checkbook in Norwich.
And I apologize for my unfamiliarity with the town plan at this point. How many sections does this surgical approach touch?
That's in the summary document that's there, and all of the edits are on the plan. So
Yeah,
so it's on there. So it
Yeah,
it
you
looks at-
don't have to
we
you don't have to
outlined it
read
in
through
that
the
letter.
60 pages.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's it's outlined in the letter.
general, does it extend beyond you know, our sort of energy?
So let me just
No,
go on.
the
it.
short
The
answer
proposed-
is no.
Yeah,
Okay.
no.
It doesn't change
yeah.
other than the energy part of the plan.
So what
Okay.
it does is specifically removes the default preferred solar siting. That's required. 5100 requires that. We can't do that anymore. And secondly, so then you've got these areas that had been, you know, what are the characteristics of the areas that that the current town plan says need to have special review? So that's the second part. And that would be, you know, what are the characteristics of what happens as it's in this plan called the Historic Village District, the Ridgeline Protection Overlay Zone, the Shoreline Protection Area, and the high priority forest blocks. Those areas are already identified in the town plan, but not in any clear way of how to assess whether or not they are, what you're doing is will permit you to approve it or permit you to deny it. We need to.
And I guess, Mary,
yeah.
that's really the key conversation
Yeah.
point here, because the default preferred solar, and we can talk about the specifics of the legal change and so forth. But the point is, you don't even create a preferred site until after an application is submitted, and it's quite a different process now. But if we skip to that, skip that second bullet, really the question is, can you take that list of types of places in town that the town cares about, that need special consideration before you're going to build PV on? Can you have a process in place that allows that kind of special evaluation? Or do you make a more simplistic blanket statement, thou shalt not? And that's really the crux of the question, because the thou shalt nots carry the most weight in a state, in a permitting process, but obviously have the least flexibility. So is there an option, and it may just be for slopes, but not for historic or scenic or whatever, but how do you craft something that gives the special consideration to certain areas that the town thinks are special, but does it with some flexibility, some ability to make decision in the future and not just lock in something? That, I think, is the challenge.
Right, that's what we have now. That's what we have now. But the kind of the vagueness is what essentially the town planning commission, I think, has not been clear then what its role has been and how to assess projects. That's been clear. So, I mean, this is a fundamental belief of what do we want the town, how do we want to guide the town in doing this? The current plan does try to guide the town, but the way that it has done it so far has not been able to be clear enough to do the reviews effectively.
Linda?
Hi, thank you very much. And I think you did an excellent job summarizing the choice with your last comments. And I have 2 points that I wanted to make. One is that if I have this question for the commission to consider, if you switch to the thou shalt not approach, my question is, can you have thou shalt not apply only to solar generation, or does it have to apply to every development? I believe the answer is it's going to have to apply to every development. And so that is something you have to consider very carefully, I think, before going that direction. And the other, you guys haven't talked about this yet, but it's been raised in a lot of the comments, which is every town has been assigned a kind of fair share amount of renewable energy generation that they ought to be planning to host within their town borders. And it's quite true that the state is not coming after any town for not doing that. There is no implementation. I would like to argue that I believe that it is a goal that the Planning Commission should take seriously, and that should be behind all the discussion about how to do stuff, which is, it's like the question should be real specific. How are we going to cite essentially about, up to 16 megawatts of solar in our town? Where are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? So I'd like to just
Yeah.
leave you with that thought. Thank you.
And if I could just follow on to that, it's sort of zeroing in on, on the language we're using. So under 2.5, future land use, the statement is steep slopes are poorly suited to development, adding and development on slopes greater than 15%, I'm assuming, shall be prohibited.
So just to point out that that is the specific statement that I disagreed with as it came out of committee. We left it in there specifically because this is the body to talk about it, not the advisory subcommittee.
Yeah.
I would agree with Linda's statement in the sense that state law, again, if we get back to the backstop for all we're doing is state law is going to trump what we do. State law says you cannot treat solar development in significantly differently than other development. So if you look at our definition of development, which is extremely broad, it's basically any structure built, any change in use, and so forth.
Yeah.
If you take the statement, thou shalt not do development on steeper than 15%, that's extremely restrictive. And so when you take that state requirement that solar cannot be singled out too much, you can add screening requirements to cut glare. You can mitigation methods to put panels around the edges of a field or so forth. You can do mitigation that is special to the PV installation. You cannot do anything that would effectively prohibit PV from that site other than, compared to other development. So it's a very important state linkage that we have to include in our deliberation.
Yes, I agree. And I think a tactic here that should be explored is, a careful eye on how we talk about scenic resources in our town plan.
Yep. Agree.
And I think through that, because just sort of reading through the, Rule 5/100, I do see that there is some discretionary latitude given to specifically scenic resources. And that's maybe where we should sort of constrain our thou shalt to that area. We shall protect our scenic resources. That gives, I think that gives us, the town, some leverage in the conversation, but doesn't do something inadvertent, like prevent development on a 15-degree slope.
Yeah. So just to say, I do want to call on Annette and make a point to what you just said, Stephen.
Yeah.
Scenic resources are absolutely key to this discussion. We need, clearly in 5/100, you need to be specific about, almost specific to the address of, the Van Orman farm is scenic, period, full stop, and so on. So that specificity has to be there. And we clearly need to redo our scenic inventory that is about 23 years old now.
Yeah.
But it's very important.
I agree with that, Jan and Stephen. I do also think that we need to have an overlap of that particular question with privilege and wealth in this town. And so I think it's an important discussion.
Annette?
Annette.
Well, yes, this is a very challenging topic. And a few things have been mentioned that I wanted to comment on. I've been contacted a lot in the last 2 weeks about towers, cell towers. There seems to be a lot of push for new towers, and just today I was looking, so I've been reviewing a lot of town plans to see, do they have regulatory language that is useful to the PUC? And today I looked at one and I take the cell tower location, the longitude and latitude, put it into Google Earth and put a push pin in for it. So I know exactly where it's going to be. Well, it turns out that one town that I was contacted about has a map in their town plan that is a viewshed protection map. And it's got colors. And just looking at it, I couldn't tell whether or not it was in the pink area that's not protected or the green area that's protected. So I took it and overlaid it on Google Earth. And what do you know? It's in the green area. So it is a clear written community standard that the PUC will likely look at. That's the kind of specificity that the PUC is looking for, is something that they can say, okay, and that the town can say, this tower is in an area, is proposed to be in an area that is protected resource. Norwich is a very challenging town for this discussion, as we have looked at where there's three-phase power and where there isn't. With all your little narrow valleys, you actually have a lot of residential solar built out already. And so the exercise that this subcommittee has been doing, and I want to give them a lot of credit for the very thoughtful approach, trying to look at where it is possible to build. And the goal isn't to restrict development, but it is to provide guidance that will, I believe, result in development getting approved quicker, and that will also result in not fighting over it and not having opposition. And a lot of the requirements for this shall and must language comes from the Vermont Supreme Court. It's an extremely difficult thing to write a plan that should be visionary and turn it into a regulatory document. Regarding the idea that every town has a quota, all of this Act 174 goes back to the 2015 Solar Siting Task Group, and I paid attention to all their meetings, and they initially had this idea that there would be a quota for every town. And they actually came to the conclusion that's not going to work, because some towns have a lot of capacity and some towns don't have hardly any at all. And so while the towns are given these numbers, they're not what are intended to be something that's mandatory. You know, I live in Rutland County. I've asked our planning commission, so are we supposed to provide all of the electricity, renewable energy for Killington and GE and Omea, which are one of the biggest users of electricity in the state? And so the idea of quotas is something that I wouldn't be too concerned about. What you all are trying to do with this plan is to create a document that has language that when a project comes along that nobody could have imagined, that there is a way of pointing to your town plan to say, does it comply or doesn't it comply? And to have that clear rather than vague. And so, you know, things like riparian areas or slopes or forest blocks. Well, the fact is that the majority of your town is not going to see big solar development because of just the lay of the land. And riparian areas, that's the interface between streams and land. And so, hey, you don't want a solar project on top of a stream or even in a buffer of a stream. The steep slope language, that's to prevent the runoff that's going to increase flooding downstream. So in a way, these are very sort of normal and reasonable things to do. But if you don't have the language that provides guidance, then you can end up with projects that will be poorly cited, and that if your town plan is not clear about where you want it and where you don't want it, you're going to end up with fighting over it. And that's what I think the whole purpose should be, is to say, yeah, we want it, this is where it will work, and try and keep it from turning into a very expensive and extensive Public Utility Commission fight, which is not fun.
Right. Can I just let's try and wrap up tonight, but I wanted to highlight several things that I think we agree on. and can maybe use to move forward. Clearly, there is a task to deal with our scenic inventory. And I would ask this group to put that in, and I think maybe we actually just take that as an agenda item for the full planning commission for a meeting quite soon that says, okay, we need to update that scenic inventory because it's a tool that we need to refer to in this and other situations. Clearly, Act 250, we're not even talking about, but Act 250, Quechee Standard, all this sort of thing, you need some guidance on scenic resources. So that I would put as a agenda item clearly needed. I think, I would state as a subcommittee member, and from what I'm hearing and seeing in comments, the goal of the subcommittee, me personally, and this group is to encourage solar to be put in appropriate locations in town. That is clearly the goal, that there's a strong sentiment in that, we are expressing the will of the town in saying that. And I think the statement that Annette just said, which is quite accurate, the way you're going to get it is by saying where to put it, making it clear where you want it and where you don't want it. Because as soon as you start fighting about it, and we fought for 3 years and got 500 kW at Upper Loveland, and not much else built in town other than rooftop in the last 5 years. So if you want to have it happen, make it clear on both sides. Yes, and encourage, discourage. And I think that's something that we can go back and set the subcommittee to task on more. And then I think there's this question of how much flexibility do you build in to specific land use types? Which ones are worthy of a thou shalt not, and which ones need some real flexibility and leeway.
Jan, Linwood's hand has been up. I know we're at time, but I also want to acknowledge that.
And that's fine. Linwood?
Yes, thank you, Jan. I agree with much of what you've just said. However, I think it needs to be emphasized that in terms of votes that have actually been taken by residents of the town, doing as much as possible to mitigate climate change, which is really what we're talking about here, and is a phrase that has yet to even come up in any of these discussions whatsoever, is something the town wants. And I don't see that as the priority here in the specific so-called targeted surgical edits that are being made. To me, they seem to be really aimed at restricting as much as possible. And as a voter who wants climate change addressed in a meaningful way, I'm not happy with that. I also think that the goals, whether Ms. Smith agrees with them or not, are important. And I think they need to be considered in this. The idea that we can just go around and say, well, there's going to be no solar here and there's going to be no solar there, and we're only going to have it here. How much is actually allowed to be generated? I think that's an important thing to know. If it's such a minuscule amount that we've effectively said we're not going to allow solar here, which I think is a possibility given the level of restrictions that you're considering, I think all of us are entitled to know that. How much in the sites that you are going to identify as permissible for solar, how much can actually be generated there? And how does it compare to the goals that have been set for Norwich, whether those are mandatory or not? Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that for a second. I think that it would be helpful or interesting, I don't know, Linda or Linwood, if you would be willing to, take that target and that goal and see, what would Norwich look like if we were in fact able to meet that? Because again, the work that the subcommittee has done, given the restrictions on three-phase power and given some of the other land restrictions, which I think, maybe you think they're too restrictive that we've proposed, but they are there. But, actually how much is possible? How much is possible were you to do a full build out? Because as we've noted, the plan currently, which has that has really almost no restrictions in town at all, has not resulted in any new projects. I think we all agree that climate is important, but we also have to think about, flooding for our neighbors. What happens when there's, protecting our streams, protecting fresh water, protecting biodiversity. There are a whole lot of things we've got to be balancing here, and we're trying to, this is a town plan that's trying to meet the. There's a lot in this town plan that talks about the quality of life, the quality of the area, open space, etc. So it's how do you find that balance and do it in a way that's recognizes all of the desires, but most of all, we've got to make sure that the regulatory language reflects what the town wants, because otherwise the PUC is going to, we're going to have a lot of people in here just, deciding for us what this town is going to look like. And I think it depends on whether we want to make some, really set some guidelines so that this town does look like the town that people want it to be.
And let me address just one point, and then I think we can wrap it and send it back to the subcommittee with some very useful comments here. But to answer the specific question, just of amount of solar potential in town, the exercise that I did, which was a glorified Google Earth, but thoughtfully done, came up with what could be on the order of 5 to 7 megawatts of capacity. I mean, it's not trivial. We have, so if 16 to Linda's number, which is the original total goal for town, if we took it as such, we already have, I think it's somewhere in the 3 or 4 category with rooftop solar and a couple of 500s dotted around. So if you start talking 5 or 6, 7 other megawatts of potential siting, we are, we are not talking about eliminating or stopping all PV. That for a town with significant geographic and infrastructure limitations, to think that we can put 5 megawatts in somewhere is a very significant. Christian?
Is that I assume that's private, we're assuming 100% of the people who own that private land want to develop and are willing to.
Oh yeah, you have to prorate the whole thing. You always have to prorate the sites.
But there's lots of untapped, parking lots and things like that, and rooftops that just haven't, I mean, there's lots of other things that can be done if people want to do them. But I mean, there are some, the state handing down a goal 15 years ago, whatever it was, in 2015, versus what we can actually do may be different. But thank you for the conversation. The Solar Siting Committee will reconvene. I think we're going to reconvene next Tuesday, Jan. I'll have to make sure.
Yeah,
Pam,
I think that's the target.
with just this, with the agenda of, continuing the discussion. So thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and obviously in preparation for that meeting, anything you want to put in as written comments, whether it's commission members or public, put that in, get it in by the middle of next week. It'll be in the packet for that meeting, and we'll roll it all together. Okay, thank you. I wanted to get some
motion to adjourn.
Let's do the minutes quickly.
Minutes.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Minutes for 11/12/24. Do I have a motion on those?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments, revisions, edits on the 11/12 minutes? All those in favor of approving as written, Vince's handiwork?
I abstain. That was
Okay,
me.
Christian abstain. Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor of the seconded motion, I heard someone seconded. I'm sure I did.
I'll second it, sure.
All right. All those in favor of the seconded. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Get some
Thank you.
substance done. It's important. And maybe we can exceed 175 pages on next meeting's packet. Take that as a
Let's hit
challenge.
200.
Let's not. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for all your work.